Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Ronke. No,
Okay, I'm just
yeah,
testing
no.
my headset.
think we are live now, Ronke. Okay, I think we can we can start now.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning in some areas, and welcome to our session on securing the links, effective follow ups with critical third parties after a supply chain attack has occurred. Let me take a moment to introduce myself. I'm Ronke Ashiku, and I'm a third party security engineer at Workday, which is part of the information security organizations focusing on third party security assessments of suppliers and seeing that process through third party risk management lifecycle. I'll hand it over to my colleagues now to introduce himself. Kenny.
Thank you, Ronke, and thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Kenny Dalton Cardoso. I'm a cybersecurity operations analyst. I've been with Workday for more than 2 years now. I've been working with Ronke on some operational work and some with other colleagues on some strategic work. And I have been working a lot on data visualization and dashboards creation. That I'll hand it over to you, Ronke.
Thank you. So, in today's session, we'll talk about supply chain attacks and how you can effectively follow up with your critical suppliers to understand the impact of security incidents to your organization and the data they possess. So, if you can please move to the next slide. So here's a quick look at the agenda for today. We will go over what a supply chain attack is and how it has evolved over the years with advanced tactics used by threat actors. We will also go over protocols that may be activated when a supply chain attack has been identified and look at effective ways of utilizing dashboards to identify suppliers that may be a bit problematic, and then how to address those suppliers. And we will look at ways to apply preventative measures to support the ongoing operations of the business relationship with third parties while protecting the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your data. At the end, we will have like time for Q&As if we have enough time. And I'm going to hand it over to Kenny. If you can please move on to the next slide.
Thank you so much, Ronke. Okay, so I think the best way to start this conversation is by asking us the following question, right? What is a supply chain attack? Our definition is a supply chain attack occurs when a malicious outside entity infiltrates an organization's network through a third party tool or service used by the organization. So, have you ever heard of the phrase, attackers will always look for the weakest link of the chain? This would be the best way to describe a supply chain attack. Attackers have a huge arsenal to their disposition. However, when a company has all the security controls in place, most likely they will focus on the less secure target and pivot from there to a stronger company. So that's what we know as a supply chain attack. Considering this, what would you say is the importance of detecting these type of attacks? Well, first of all, we have like an increase on the frequency of this type of attacks. According to CrowdStrike, there has been an increase of over 430% in such incidents since 2021 to 2023. When an attacker looked to gain access to a company through the services or products they were outsourcing. Then we have like the financial impact. The financial impact can imply significant financial losses, as we know. And then we have like operational disruption. Like business disruption can lead to operational inefficiencies and the loss of customer trust. Then we have like the reputational damage. This covers the negative publicity your organization may face, possibly being subject to regulatory legal implications and fines. Also, there's a loss of client as business relationships are damaged to the organization's reputation and the trust of the customers being lost. Many more. Now that we have learned what is a supply chain attack and what is the importance of detecting this type of attacks, let's move on to some examples. Next slide, please. Okay, on this slide, we see some well-known organizations who have experienced some type of supply chain attack that was used to reach other organizations. Beginning with the Target attack back on December 2013, where Target gave network access to a third-party vendor. It was an HVAC company, which did not appear to follow the broadly accepted information security practices. These vendors' weak security controls allowed the attackers to gain a foothold into Target's network. Then we have like the upstream server attacks, which are the most common, in which a malicious actor infects a system that is upstream. They can infect it with a malicious app, which then infects all the users that are downstream, meaning that the users that are going to download this. We have SolarWinds as an example that falls into this category. And we're going to be able to see more detail on SolarWinds in the next slides. But then we have like the midstream attacks, which are attacks that which the target intermediary elements such as software development tools. We have Log4j, for example, which falls into a dependency confusion category. These attacks exploit private internally created software dependencies by registering a dependency in which the same name, but with a higher version number on a public repository. The false dependency is then likely to be pulled into the software being built instead of the correct dependency. Then we have like CircleCI. CircleCI falls into this category of stolen SSL. In this type of attacks, private keys are compromised and used to authenticate users to secure websites and cloud services. We have continuous integration and continuous delivery infrastructure attacks introduce malware into the development authentication infrastructure, such as by cloning legitimate GitHub resources. CircleCI also falls into this category. And not only that, like cybersecurity companies themselves are target of these supply chain attacks. We have CC Cleaner, for example, that was compromised with a backdoor that gave malicious actors access to millions of computers in which software was installed. Although CC Cleaner was a product of Avast, a cybersecurity company, it was actually compromised before Avast even bought the company, like the company that originally created it. The attackers instead installed these backdoors and then waited until the acquisition of was completed before beginning to contaminate in all the downloads. With this, I'll hand it over to Ronke to tell us a little bit more on the cyber threat landscape. Ronke?
Thank you, Kenny. As we mentioned earlier, the cyber threat is evolving. Threat actors are using sophisticated techniques, tools, and existing exploitable vulnerabilities to infiltrate organizations. And if you can take the slide one more back, a previous slide. And like this landscape is based on several factors such as like technological advancement, geopolitical tension, and the cyber criminals organization. So based on the advancements in technology, I'm going to do a poll to ask a question. What is one technology advancement that could potentially pose a security threat today? So if you can scan the QR code and put your answers in there, and we'll probably just give you a couple of seconds. Awesome. That's actually the answer, all of the above. And again, with the introduction of artificial intelligence today, though it's very beneficial, it also introduces a potential risk. And there was this article that revealed how AI scammers stole about $25 million using AI technology. So the scammer actually like hosted a video conference with a legitimate employee of a company, and then they acted to be like the CFO. So they had used AI to disguise the face to look like the CFO. And there were other like board of directors in that conference room. So perhaps the victim was panicking and all, and that was how they got him or her to transfer about $25 million to an account. And again, with the use of AI, one may not even immediately realize that they have been compromised, which leads to our next poll. If you can please move to the next slide. Can we please move to the next slide? Okay, so how long do you think it typically takes an organization to discover that they've been compromised? If you can scan the QR code and wow, we're on it today. Exactly 6 months. And so that is correct. And according to the 2023 IBM Cost of Data Breach Report, the global, oh, we have some answers coming in. I will wait for a few seconds to see if it changes. I think our answers, oh, it keeps changing. Okay, I feel like our answers are locked in. So 60, oh, I see it's still changing.
Yep.
All right, so we see a couple, 14% that says within a few hours, and then 29% that says within a few days. And then we have the 57% pool that says over 6 months. And the answer is actually over 6 months. I mean, it could vary, but typically on average, research has shown it probably takes over 6 months. And again, according to the 2023 IBM Costs of Data Breach report, the global average time to identify and contain a breach is 204 days to detect, and then an additional 73 days to contain the breach. This means it often takes more than 6 months before a breach is discovered. And we can see an example of this in the geopolitical tension between the US and what we believe to be the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service when they threatened the American infrastructure and government institution through the SolarWind attack. So, like this involved attackers like inserting malicious code that included a backdoor into the SolarWinds software updates called Orion. And once that update was sent to about 18,000 SolarWinds customers, they downloaded they installed the updates, and this created a backdoor. Without any of the organizations knowing. And that backdoor was probably sending information to the potential perpetrator. This impacted government institution, a lot of companies, the healthcare industry, the power industry, and they remained undetected on those networks for several months. Its studies shows that the breach started in March of 2020, and it was discovered 9 months after, so in December of 2020. So this even took longer than 6 months. And again, this gave the perpetrator enough time to kind of like steal credentials and informations from those organizations. Can we please move on to the next slide? Okay, so how did the solar wind get infiltrated in the first place? The threat actor could have obtained valid credentials through phishing and social engineering one of the SolarWinds employees. They could have been exploiting weak passwords, where you have like admin as the username and password using default credentials. It could have been through a SolarWinds third party, having that business relationship with SolarWind, and they probably got phished. They probably got their credentials stolen. You know, they probably hopped from their network to SolarWinds, like the third party's network to SolarWinds network. And, they moved laterally once they got into SolarWinds network. They kind of like moved laterally. And, they tried to identify vulnerable systems on their network, what hasn't been patched, and then taking advantage of what hasn't been patched and exploiting those and like leveraging 0 days exploits. And so it could have been through several ways. And based on the scenario described, we're able to see common attack vectors used by threat actors, such as like phishing, social engineering, possible exploitation of vulnerabilities in the system, vulnerabilities in web applications, third parties being compromised. In some cases, it could be like due to lack of negligence. They didn't do their due diligence to make sure they're following good security practices, thereby impacting other organizations indirectly. And we also see like nation states who focus on espionage, sabotage, or geopolitical gain, like in the case of like SolarWind. We have cyber criminals who are motivated by financial gains, like we discussed in the AI scenario with the conference call. You also have like employee insider threats who intentionally or unintentionally compromise your organization. So can we please move on to the next slide? So, when a supply chain attack occurs, we go through a structured due diligence process when responding to the incident, like ensuring like the security and integrity of the organization. So please note that there is a structure, like the structure that we use may vary from organization to organization. So once that happens, we kind of go through a verification process. And here we want to validate that the incident, that we received is coming from a trusted source. So, trusted source like CISA, that's the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is headed by the Homeland Security. You want to have like subscription services that you pay for. And then also you want to like reach out to your business owners managing the supplier relationship to see from if they've heard from the supplier, if they've provided any information about the incident. And then on the next thing you also want to do is you want to do impact assessments. So you want to classify the incidents, if it's critical, if it's high, or if it's medium, low, and you want to prioritize your resources. You probably want to focus on the criticals and the highs, again, due to limited resources that you may have. Again, it varies from organizations to organizations. And then, you want to identify if the compromised third party product is used within your organization. And if it is being used in your organization, you want to probably like start activating your incident response playbook. And then also you want to check to see if your critical suppliers also use that affected product. So you can use like different tools just to that would monitor your third party's external facing network, and try to gather information from there to see, okay, what products are they using these products. And then the next thing you want to do after the impact assessment is to notify your internal stakeholders. So you want to, if it's especially if it's something that is critical, you want to engage your incident response team. You want to engage legal, especially if personal data has been compromised. You want to engage your vulnerability management team just to coordinate their responses to see how you can better secure your environment, your resources, your people. And then after your internal stakeholders have been notified, you want to engage with the affected supplier, and this can be done through the business relationship that you have with the supplier. That's your business owner. And you want to ask the supplier for incident details, data compromise, the impacts, remediation measures, understand their mitigating controls and any necessarily legal actions that need to be taken, if there are patches that need to be applied. And then third, last but not the least, you want to send a targeted communication to your critical suppliers to assess their exposure. You want to collect details on their use of the compromised product, any incidents and steps taken to remediate through a security questionnaire. So you can like again create a questionnaire based off of that security incident, and then you can send it to your third parties. You can ask them, are you being impacted, and what they're doing to address this measure, to address that issue. So if you can please take it to the next slide. I'm going to hand it over to you, back to Kenny. If you can move over to the next slide, please. Thank
Yep.
you.
Okay. Thank you, Ronke. So we have shared our security form or our security questionnaire with our critical suppliers and included questions like, are you using the XYZ tool, library, software? Have you noticed any strange behavior? Like, have you applied patches, etc.? Once the suppliers complete the security forms, we can move to the next stage, which is to identify compromised suppliers. But to be able to identify compromised suppliers, we have to be able to differentiate between affected and compromised. Affected systems are those that contain the vulnerable software or hardware and are at risk of being exploited if the vulnerability is not patched or mitigated. However, being affected doesn't necessarily mean that the system has been breached. It simply indicates the potential for compromise if the vulnerability is exploited by an attacker. On the other hand, we have like the compromised systems. These systems are those that have been fully exploited by an attacker taking advantage of the vulnerability. In this case, the attacker has gained unauthorized access to the system, potentially exfiltrating the data, stealing the data, installing malware, modifying the data, or using the compromised system for further attacks, like to move laterally, as Shronke mentioned before. It is very important for us to understand this difference. And to help us better understand, Ronke is going to show us some scenarios.
Thank you, Kenny. So when a new vulnerability or security incident is disclosed, the response provided by our third parties through the security form that we would send out supports us to identify our compromised suppliers. The actions we need to take when we receive their responses are one, like determine if the supplier was affected by the incident or if they were not affected. If they were not affected, that's good, we move on. If they were affected, we want to understand like, okay, what have you applied a patch or deployed the solution? And if the answer is yes, that's great. If the answer is no, we want to like further investigate and kind of like, okay, can you provide us with your remediation plan? When do you plan to apply this patch or this update? And then just work through with the supplier on that. And then the next thing is we want to also determine if the supplier has been compromised, but there is no evidence of organizational data like organizational data was impacted. So it's like there was no breach, no access, no access, no data modification. But so here is like we just want to get like an investigation letter from the supplier, kind of to better understand the scope of the attack and like what actions they took. And then also we want to determine if the supplier has been compromised and if there's evidence of like data being impacted. And so it's like data, there's been a breach data, access was being data was accessed, it was data was modified. So here we also want like an investigation letter to kind of like understand again the scope of the attack, the type of data that was compromised, and the action taken to resolve the issue. So if it's a password that was compromised, you're informing users to change their password. If it's that, there's been a lot of like phishing attacks and people have been clicking, you want to create like a security awareness training for those users to kind of bring that awareness to them. If it's that, if it was that, okay, things needed to be patched, you're applying patches. If things were misconfigured, you're like changing the configuration to make it more secure. And then also if there's some legal actions that need to be taken, it's also important that you engage your legal team and taking any necessary legal action on your end. And then yeah, so it's very important that you involve all the necessary parties in this situation as well, like your accounts manager, the business owner, the incident response team, as we talked about earlier. Can we move over to the next slide, please? So, one of our major challenges with conducting a supply chain follow up is that sometimes we get unresponsive suppliers. They're not just responding to the questionnaires that we send to them. And so, we have created some strategies that we have implemented to address this challenge. And we have created like operational processes that involves one, engaging yeah, yeah, thank you. Engaging with the business owner, so it's like you're like collaborating with the business owner who owns that relationship with the supplier to help us connect with them and get the most appropriate contact from the supplier side. In some cases the the point of contact we had may have moved on and is no longer with the company, and that's why we're probably not getting a response. And so it's like we're working with them to get like the most up to date individual to contact. And then also we have like an internal liaison who kind of like sees the whole project through between the business owner and the supplier and everything else in between. And if we don't know who the business owner might be, they would be able to help us identify who that business owner might be. And then the second way is like just leveraging the contracts that we have previously signed with the supplier. Usually during the onboarding process, we would have the supplier sign our security exhibits, our contracts, having them like agree to our terms and condition. And one of them is, trying providing support in providing documentation to do an assessment on them. And so it's like if they're having a difficult time having the supplier respond to our questionnaire, we kind of like pull out the clauses from the contract and share it with the supplier, and we're like, you agreed to do this. And so that's one way we also kind of like try to work through it. I will now hand it over to my colleague Kenny, who will go through more operational procedures that will help drive things forward.
Thank you, Ranke. So to bring you more about like the technical and operational strategies that we had developed through time, so we have like the executive dashboards. So we were able to collect all the responses from our critical suppliers. Well, at least for the ones that have responded. But this data is not fully visible until we display it into a nice dashboard, executive level, or a very detailed level where you can see like specifically the information from a single point of contact, in which like you could be able to respond questions like, what is the response rate? Who are my unresponsive suppliers? How many suppliers were affected? How many suppliers were compromised? With this data, we will be able to drive better conversations with business owners or like even with the contracts that Ronke mentioned before. But we're going to be diving more into the dashboards in the next slide. For now, let's just move on to the next strategy, which is like the scripts for community pages. So the development of scripts, we noticed while conducting our supply chain follow-ups, like we realized that some suppliers were not responding to our security forms or like the security questionnaires. But they had an official statement concerning the incidents we shared with them. For example, if we were following up with them for SolarWinds, they already had something on their public website saying like we were not impacted by SolarWinds. What would be the main reason for this kind of official statement to be published? The main reason would be like convenience. Imagine having to fill up like 50 questionnaires at the same time, like coming from everywhere, and asking like, oh, have you been impacted? When you didn't really even use that tool or like the software, the product, anything. So instead of like responding to each one of these, it's better just to have one official response and place it where everyone can see it. Another good reason would be that these suppliers may have a policy to not complete these questionnaires or security forms because they might include sensitive data. So instead of that, of replying to questionnaires, they get internally an official statement that every like all people agree and publish it, so that can be viewed by everyone. So that was really good for us to like look if a supplier was impacted. But unfortunately, there is no consistency on the space where the suppliers publish these statements. They could be in a section named security bulletins. They could be in a section called community pages, or maybe they created in a specific space for this specific incident. This problem led us to use a more technical approach using passive reconnaissance. By leveraging Google Docs, we were able to retrieve these official statements. And by adding a layer of Python script, we were able to run this job with a final, like as a final job to kind of retrieve all the official statements from all the suppliers at once. So with this, let's move on to the next slide, which is where we're going to be diving more into the dashboards. So over here in the dashboards, we can see this example of the dashboard for supply chain attack follow-ups. As we can see here in the main dashboard on the top left, there's this global supply chain attacks. So all these security incidents are named on the right, on the left. For example, we have Circle CI, exfiltration of data. We have like core and lib core vulnerabilities. We have Jump Cloud, Israel. So we have like the security incidents on the left, and then we have like the total number of suppliers that were follow up on this specific incident. Uh, and on the next cell, we can see that there's the number of suppliers that responded. And on the next one, we're going to be the percentage of the respondents. So as we can see here, for some of these security incidents, there were like for 3 of them, there were about 70%, and for the rest of them, they are less than 70%. Probably due to the unresponsive suppliers that we mentioned before. On the next chart, we can see like the suppliers by impact. So over here, color-coded, we can see different statuses or statuses, yeah, basically. Mentioning, for example, in green, like they're not impacted. So not impacted in this scenario would mean like they were not affected and they were not compromised. So they responded saying like, we're not using this tool, like, and like that's it. So they were not impacted. Then we have like the orange. Orange would mean impacted fixed, which in this scenario would mean like the company indeed were using the tool software, but they have like remediated, like they have applied the patches or the mitigations controls necessary for this to not being exploited. Then in red, we have like the impacted not fixed, which would mean like they have been affected, like the software is compromised, but like not necessarily compromised, but they have not remediated yet. Like they provided probably an estimated time for where they are planning to remediate it. And the next one would be like the refuse. For some of these, they have refused to respond to the questionnaire. And we're missing one here, but it's the case where they were affected and compromised, and there was some organizational data involved. So for that, you would really need to focus on the strategies that Ronke mentioned before. On the next chart, we have like the unresponsive POCs. For each unresponsive supplier, we have like a POC, like a point of contact where we are reaching out and sending the security form. So this would be like the unresponsive POCs, where we can take this information and communicate to the key stakeholders. You know what, we have like this POC from the supplier side, and we are not giving, we are not, they are not completing the form. So the key stakeholders can help us like drive this conversation, saying like, yeah, probably, you know what, that specific POC has moved from the organization, and this is the new POC. Okay, so that we can record and like send with the appropriate POC. Finally, we have like the impacted suppliers by tiers. So we have like data comes in different sensitivity. We have, for example, like the social security numbers. We have like date of birth, phone numbers, like physical addresses. Like those are really sensitive, and that's what led us to kind of divide it into different, segregate this information into different categories. Like if it is really critical, they would be a one. It would be classified as a tier one. If it is like kind of confidential, tier two, and if it is kind of internal, only then tier three. So over here we can see like the data segregated in the different security incidents, and also like color coded into the not impacted, impacted fix, or impacted not fix or refuse. So with this, I'll hand it over to Ronke. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Kenny. Um, so here, like to ensure your organization data remains secure while using like third-party software, cloud services, or external services, it's crucial for the appropriate internal team to conduct their due diligence by performing a supplier onboarding security assessment process. So here you can ask the supplier for their ISO 27001 certificate for their SOC 2 Type 2 reports, and this report kind of demonstrates the effectiveness of their internal security control. And this is often validated by an independent third party. And then you can also ask them for their pen test result for the service they're providing to us or for their external facing network, just to, ensure that they're addressing those vulnerabilities that they're identifying in an appropriate time frame. And then so like what happens after you go through an onboarding process? Like, do you just leave the supplier to be for the next several years? The answer is no. We have to do like a periodic review. So an annual review of those your critical suppliers that have sensitive information. Um, so you want to, as we see it, technology keeps advancing, technology gets deprecated. And as this is occurring, you want to make sure that your suppliers are also keeping up with the times and they're updating their deprecated system, making sure that they're using the latest technology. And then also we try to like do a continuous monitoring process where we engage like with this, we use like tools to kind of like scan us the suppliers externally facing network. So these third party services actually do it and kind of identify what are vulnerable within their externally facing network. And we kind of look at their critical, high, and medium findings and just making sure that they're addressing those findings. And then last but not the least, again, in the event of like a critical security incident, you want to craft a message to your third parties that include like a questionnaire focused on assessing the impact of that incident on their infrastructure, its potential effects on the organization and the data and their remediation plan. Again, you want to check with the community pages for updates and respond to those like incident response rather than going to their community pages to see what their stance is rather than just waiting for a communication. And again, you have resources or tools that will help you identify, like help you create those questionnaires. You can customize the questionnaire, and then you can now send it to your suppliers, and those tools can help you track what their responses are within that tool. And going back to like the onboarding security assessment process, when you want to onboard your suppliers, we have questions that we can use from the SIG-like questionnaire. That's the standardized information gathering questionnaire. There are like 1,000 security questions that you can get from that pool. As Kenny had mentioned previously, you don't want to overwhelm your suppliers with so many questions, or like too many questionnaires that you're sending to them. And in the case of a SIG-like questionnaire, it's like you're just pulling those necessary questions that kind of like fit the risk appetite for your organization, and you're just pulling a select few and sending it to your suppliers. So yeah, this concludes the presentation for today, and we will open up the floor for questions. I don't know if there are
Let's see on the comments.
questions.
I think we did a really great job, Ronke.
I think so, Kenny. I'm also checking with Caroline to see if she can see any questions. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have any questions coming through. And so, if there are no questions, I believe we can wrap up the session.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for your participation, and have a great day.